role is important. And I think that is a sort of Department of Health thing that could be done really easily, wouldn't cost much, and just engage them at this point. But also, before I ask other people, I mean, it might also have an impact in relation to postnatal depression and the safety of men as well, which is really not talked about. The courses I do, postnatal depression comes up every single time in mums and dads, and it's totally unspoken about. And, suicide, the biggest killer of men under 50 now. Why are we not doing something about that? So, yeah.
I completely concur with that. I spent the last 20 years developing information services, working with maternity services. I'm now taking it internationally to Africa and the Middle East, and that is the key. I mean, in terms of low-hanging fruit, the key moment of where fathers and institutions connect is around the birth, and that is a maximum opportunity. It's very complicated because it doesn't quite fit the NHS system, the health system, and lack of resources. So it's very fraught to try to get something done, but it definitely should be done. And the key, I think, one of the things that we made a mistake with in the last 20 years was focusing too much on the institutions and changing them, rather than engaging with fathers and mothers themselves and changing the way that what they want from a maternity service, or what they want from leave, for that matter. I think there's a communication piece to do, which can be done digitally, and that's what I'm working on at the moment, is actually digital communication to those fathers, but also to the mothers, about really the importance of the father-child relationship. I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's not that we don't believe in this country that the father-child relationship is important. I think the key thing is that we think the mother-child relationship is a whole lot more important. Okay, it's the comparison that counts. So that whatever decision we make, we're always making it on that basis. Yes, it's important, but that's more important. So we are going to prioritise, and that happens across the board. And I think what you can do around maternity, around that, is simply inform mothers and fathers about the science, simply inform them about what the nature of the father-child relationship actually is compared to the mother as well, and information, so that we start to form different expectations and a different demand. Because we've been talking about employers and things. We do have to bear in mind that mothers and fathers, these barriers are inside our heads too. Okay, and I'll give you the easiest way to illustrate it is that, whenever mothers start to work, there's this issue of guilt, right? There's something like you stepping away, and there's all this talk about. And every time a father stops working and earning, he starts feeling inadequate. And it doesn't matter how, not every father or mother, but it doesn't matter how much, I've been doing this for 20 years, but when I'm not earning money, I feel terrible. I can't help it. It just gets you at the middle of the night. And I think it's the same with many mothers who are pursuing careers. They've got this niggling thing. And those barriers, they're barriers, and they're inside ourselves. And I think we need to think very much also about enabling employees and mothers and fathers to tackle these issues and to become confident with wider choices. We have to think about that too.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
My low hanging fruit. Flying fruit. I have already said we should have a day one right to paternity leave. It cannot be right that a woman goes into a new job, and if she discovers she's pregnant the next day, she has a right to take maternity leave. Father goes into a new job, and if his partner becomes pregnant the next day, he has got to wait for 26 weeks before he can even talk about it. So and it's only 2 weeks. It's only 2 weeks leave. So it should be a day one right. It should be for workers as well as employees, and it should be paid 90% like maternity leave.
Thank you. And Tina?
Well, I agree with all of that. All of the before, but also just want to emphasise just what an incredible opportunity the moment is when a man becomes a father for the first time. So antenatally we can do a lot of preparation, but that really a life-changing moment for mothers and fathers, but for all sorts of men who suddenly see that they're going to try and do this in their life or whatever, that actually it is a great opportunity to grasp. But the policies currently signal something. They signal, yeah, you're important here for those first 10 days if you're lucky enough to have paternity leave, and then it's okay, now you're back in the workplace. The shared parental leave is not filtering through as currently constituted in terms of, you're going to continue to be equally. So we've signalled from such an early point, and it's sort of deflating almost, because this really is an opportunity for fathers of any ages to be suddenly thinking, right, okay, my life is going to be like this, I'm going to do this for this child. It's such a really rich moment to try to make a difference. And if you want to reorganise the way in which we organise caring and work, then you've got to be in there signalling something different to what is currently being signalled. So it's a great opportunity, but not currently being used in the most effective way that it could be.
Ask another question, if you don't mind. I found out yesterday one of my friends who's in a marriage, he's married to another man, is about to adopt a baby. And obviously it's a very interesting area because there's a growing number of men who are wanting to adopt, and I haven't heard anything yet in relation to same-sex male couples who are wanting to take on from an early age, from birth, the paternity rights. And I just wonder if there's any comments you had in relation to that and access to services as well, because I think it's an area that we haven't necessarily focused in on as much as we probably should have done part of this committee.
Yeah.
I think we see very few, if any, examples on the helpline, perhaps not surprisingly, because it is a small group of parents. But I would imagine that you would see similar issues that are faced by lone parents, lone fathers, particularly those who don't have, who are not the primary carer, and so have organised access on particular days or particular weekends. So a fairly common call that we'll get from a lone father in that situation is, I've got everything arranged so I see my kids here and here in the month, and my shifts are being changed. My employer won't give, and the employer doesn't think through the fact that this is a man who has family responsibilities. There is an employer blindness there. So that, I think, is what same-sex male couples may encounter, in the same way that young fathers encounter it. The employers don't expect a man to have childcare responsibilities that are immovable.
So how do you change that? What has been effective elsewhere in changing that?
I think it would be giving the right to request more teeth, as previously suggested, because those fathers have got to have somewhere to take their lack of rights, or rather they are rights, but they're not rights. They're rights that are very difficult to access.
Okay. Before I bring Flick in, there's just a couple of other things I wanted to just ask. In terms of the sort of evidence about changes in employment practices, such as increasing freelance or agency or casual working, anything you would like to share with us in terms of how that particularly affects fathers? We heard quite a lot of that when we did our gender pay gap inquiry around mothers, but is there any evidence about how those changes in employment practice are affecting fathers?
One thing, it's not necessarily evidence, but I'm acutely aware at the moment that there is this industrial strategy green paper out, which is looking at the future of the nation's sort of industry and productivity and what that all looks like. And there are a number of areas like this, the changing work practices. You've got a growing gig economy, growing shift work, different contracts coming up. And that, again, this is something that tends to be held by BAEs at the moment. It's the business department's business. And this is, again, it's another argument for just saying there needs to be someone at a level above departmental levels, sort of up in the cabinet or somewhere like that can put their finger down into each of these areas. Because, I mean, the CSJ, we are an organisation interested in family, but actually even we are responding to the industrial strategy from the viewpoint of education, skills, later life development. We're not responding as part of family. And so, I mean, that's not evidence such that you asked for, but there is this sort of this wider thing about work that happens in isolation in the Department of Business and does not have family input. And the Industrial Strategy Green Paper is out right now as a perfect example of that. And I wonder how many family groups are putting into that, and I wonder whether the business department actually cares if they are.
Okay.
I mean, we've talked a lot about what evidence is there today, and I think that now would be an extremely good moment to do a 5th work-life balance survey. If you remember, the business department did 4 work-life balance surveys. They talked to employers, they talked to employees. It was very much at the time in the early 2000s about understanding how ready employers and employees were for flexible working. It also fed into the parental leave discussions. I think there would be a really sound rationale now for a 5th work-life balance survey, which could be particularly looking at fathers and leave, and if it could major in on SMEs in particular. Those are the big gaps that we have now.
Thank you.
Me? Just a quick plug then, Edward, that the Women and Work APPG are doing Women in the Industrial Strategy, so perhaps we could have the submission from you. We've got an inquiry over the next year, haven't we? We'll write the report at the end of the year, so any help on that would be brilliant. Right, sorry. Go back to this. The last of questions you'd be glad to know. Looking at international comparisons and what other countries do better, where are we in relation? I think we've touched on this a little bit, probably quite poor, but where are we in relation to other countries? And then I'll come on to the policies and workplace practices that we should cherry pick from abroad. So can we just start with where we are compared to others?
We're better than America, I think.
Yes.
So, we can say a positive note.
Probably increasingly so.
But pretty much over the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, I work a lot with colleagues in Sweden on this area, where you really see the sort of cultural shifts that have taken place around expectations of working and caring and who's doing what and the sharing, etc. So, and in fact, as you were saying earlier, Duncan, about, we made this clear a while ago, I think, before the shared parental leave policy came in, that, we've learnt a lot from other countries, which is the only way to make this work, appears to be, non-transferable leave for the father. So when probably not a good choice of language, which said we should force men to take the leave, I meant we need to have that non-transferable element in there rather than leaving it just as an open choice between mothers and fathers. Germany has an interesting, I think, perhaps you know more about. Did you talk about Germany earlier?
A bit,
yeah.
Yes. Well, they have a particular system, but I would on this I would recommend the work of Peter Moss. Now, I found out he hadn't made a written submission, which is a pity, but he is absolutely the most knowledgeable person on international comparison and what works and what doesn't in other countries. So I strongly recommend that you look at his work, because he and his team have analysed. Because the international systems are very complicated, they're very different. In Germany you have an incentive system that if both parents take leave they get a bit more of it and things like that. So there are very complicated and detailed things. But they've as I say, they've synthesised out of that those 3 things that I said earlier. Protected leave, entitlements that you can't give away, finance, and backing it up with conviction and public information campaigns and things, so that you attack the culture. But it's not about forcing people to do. They will. The good thing is, I'm not really throwing it into you, but often the daddy month is, that's social engineering. Right? The liberal argument is, that's social. It's not. It's just taking the lid off the constraints on the choices, letting people choose a bit more flexibly. In no country have they achieved equality in that sense, right? In no country. And there are problems in Sweden. Okay? There are problems everywhere. It's not. No one's arrived yet. They're just a lot further down the road than we are. We're quite far behind.
Is it Sweden where they've reduced the hours of work as well, so people can get home earlier? Which country? There's one of those Scandinavian countries which has said work finishes at 3 or something like that.
Yeah, they're trying a 6-hour day, yeah.
Is it Wednesday afternoon?
It's just finished, that trial. It was planned Sweden, and they reduced the working week to 30 hours.
Did it work?
It was very expensive. I think we're waiting for the academic study evidence, but what I've read about it is that it worked in the sense that people liked it, not surprisingly. It was really good for family life. The particular case study I saw was carers in a care home, and the standard of care had gone up because people's shifts were shorter. So they weren't tired, they were able to focus on the people they were caring for. So I think that the view is that if it could be afforded, it's an extremely good way of approaching things. And certainly, we suffer from long hours in the UK. Our men no longer, you'll be happy to hear, are no longer working the longest hours in Europe. We're now second or third longest. But it does mean that about 30% of men are working 48 hours or more a week. And if they're fathers, and they're likely to be because fathers work longer hours than non-fathers, a 48-hour plus week means you're probably not seeing your children. You're probably leaving the house before they get up and coming back, too late to put them to bed. And so the cuddling that Duncan is advocating isn't happening because the child's asleep.
So are there any models that you think that we should be adapting, or policies that you would like to see it put into this country from abroad, with all the studies that you've done?
I would say, I don't know if it counts as international at the moment, but you mentioned Scotland's Year of the Dad earlier. I mean, it was a very low-cost, straightforward thing to do to say that this is a priority. I think the Scottish government spent about £400,000 on it. And we're not talking about a hugely expensive thing, but just a campaign where we say this is where we're going to prioritise this. And that's very close to home. And so we're not, again, it's not about billboards and things. A lot of this stuff is happening. There are small organisations all over the country doing this stuff already. It's about highlighting them, highlighting best practice, encouraging them and really pushing it.
Because I would say the Year of the Dad was driven by Fathers Network Scotland, who are they're a network. They're really well connected. They engaged a lot of fathers' organisations, grassroots organisations. They had a lot of events. And it was a really wonderful, lively, engaging year.
And when did that finish?
Just did.
So we've got to see the knock-on effect, to see whether it's changed culture, and haven't we in the workplace, which will probably take about another year before we get the feedback, which will be interesting then, yeah.
The other thing I say is CSJ, we haven't really looked at international comparisons, but we do across all our work. And without wanting to bang the same drum again, it's that thing about culture, thinking about how you transpose an individual policy to a different culture is quite important, not to think that because this policy works in Sweden that we can just transpose it and it will work in the UK. If you're pulling it into a different culture, it's quite a different outcome.
I think that's the point, isn't it, really? Okay, that's finished.
Brilliant. That's great. Any other questions from anybody? That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We're incredibly grateful both for your oral evidence but also for the written evidence that you have given to us. We'll be using that extensively, I'm sure, in the report that we'll be publishing in the next few weeks. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.